By the first months of 1943, the American presence in North Africa had become a trial by fire. The U.S. Army, still young in its global role, was colliding headfirst with the harsh realities of mechanized warfare in a way it had never experienced before. The desert was not merely a stretch of sand and rock. It was a grinding crucible where heat blistered equipment, wind stripped visibility to nothing, and survival depended not just on skill or bravery, but on the smallest, most ordinary tools. And one of the simplest tools of war, the entrenching shovel, was exposing a weakness that no strategist in Washington had anticipated. Gone were the static trench lines of World War I. This new war moved fast. Tanks darted across open terrain. Motorized columns rolled for miles, and infantry companies were expected to entrench within minutes whenever the battle shifted. The foxhole, simple, crude, often despised, had become one of the only defenses a soldier could dig on his own. And to dig quickly meant the difference between catching shrapnel in the open or having a fighting chance. But the standard U.S. entrenching tool, the M1943 T-handle shovel, was a relic from a slower era. Soldiers had carried it across the muddy battlefields of France in 1918. But by 1943 it felt ancient, nearly 2 feet long, with a rigid wooden shaft and a fixed blade. The old model took up too much room on a soldier's pack, snagged on gear, cracked under stress, and weighed more than its usefulness justified. Worst of all, it took precious time to use. Unfolding wasn't necessary. It didn't fold at all. But its size made it awkward, clumsy, and prone to snapping when a soldier needed it most. In a world where seconds meant survival, this delay could be deadly. A quartermaster officer, assigned to observe frontline logistics in Tunisia, documented the issue with blunt honesty in his reports. His notes painted a picture far more urgent than any supply chart or engineering blueprint. He wrote that the entrenching tool was one of the few pieces of equipment a fighting man refused to discard. Ammunition, food, even extra clothing might be sacrificed to lighten the load. But the shovel was never left behind. A soldier would run into combat with his rifle in one hand and his entrenching tool strapped to his gear because he knew its value. Not as a convenience, but as a lifeline. He recorded something else too, something chilling. When the need for foxholes arises, he wrote, the need is immediate, and the need is deep. But with the old M1910, soldiers were struggling to carve anything more than shallow depressions, especially when the ground hardened under the desert sun. The tools simply didn't meet the demands of modern warfare. Across the desert, American troops watched with a mix of irritation and admiration as German prisoners passed by. On the belts of these captured men hung sleek, compact folding shovels, tools unlike anything U.S. infantrymen had ever been issued. These German-made folding spades snapped open with a solid mechanical confidence and locked into multiple positions. Soldiers who had tested captured examples realized instantly how far ahead the German design truly was. They folded down to less than 19 inches. They deployed in seconds. They locked with rigid precision. And most importantly, they stayed locked. American troops quickly recognized what German engineers had figured out long before the war began. A shovel is not just a digging tool. It's survival equipment. And the German Klappspaten was engineered exactly with that philosophy in mind. The German folding shovel first appeared in 1938, years before the world exploded into conflict. It was not only the first mass-issued folding and entrenching tool used by a major world power. It was a masterpiece of field engineering. The blade was stamped from hardened steel and attached to a hinged assembly riveted tightly to a solid hardwood handle. But the true innovation, the detail that set it apart, was the locking mechanism. A thick, ribbed Bakelite collar, rich red in color, which screwed down over the joint like the mechanism of a precision tool. This color was revolutionary. Bakelite, an early thermoset plastic, didn't melt in heat, didn't soften under strain, and certainly didn't crack easily. Its grooved surface allowed soldiers to twist it tight even with muddy hands, bloody knuckles, or numb fingers in the dead of winter. And once tightened, it clamped the blade in place with iron resolve, whether set straight for digging or angled like a pickaxe to break stubborn ground. German troops used it in Poland's forests, France's farmlands, and the unforgiving frozen hell of Stalingrad. It endured freezing mud, ice, and the brutal shock of hacking through frozen soil. No matter where they carried it, the tool earned a reputation for dependability. So when Americans encountered these shovels in North Africa, something became instantly clear. This wasn't just another piece of enemy equipment. It was better, undeniably better, than what they had been issued. Soldiers began hoarding captured examples like treasure, and supply officers couldn't help noticing. Some German POWs marched without their shovels, quietly stripped of them by the same men they had been fighting just hours earlier. That alone spoke volumes. By the end of 1942, American engineers could no longer ignore what troops already knew. The U.S. Army desperately needed a folding entrenching tool, and the Germans had already built the perfect model. So the Quartermaster Corps began a rushed but determined project. Study the German shovel, copy its strengths, and produce millions of American-made versions fast enough to supply an army growing almost faster than it could be equipped. Teams at development centers across the U.S. brought in captured German tools, laying them out on drafting tables like specimens under a microscope. Every curve of the blade, every angle of the hinge, every length of wood and steel was measured, photographed, documented. They tested the three positions. They gauged the ease of carry, the speed of deployment, the feel of the handle. They admired the compactness. They respected the engineering brilliance. Then they began constructing a new American entrenching tool modeled closely on the German piece. The M1943. The M1943 was, in many ways, a faithful tribute. It kept the three-position blade, folded for storage, straight for digging, angled for chopping. It retained roughly the same size, the same folding mechanism, the same general form. The blade still riveted onto a hilt attached to a single-piece wooden handle. And on paper, it matched the German silhouette almost exactly. But a few changes, just a few, would ultimately decide the tool's fate. In the push to mass-produce millions of units quickly and cheaply, American engineers replaced the robust Bakelite locking collar with a smaller, thinner aluminum nut. It was simpler to cast, easier to machine, and required fewer manufacturing steps. The decision appeared harmless at the time, just a small adjustment to speed up production. But those minor differences would soon prove catastrophic in the hands of soldiers digging for their lives. The aluminum nut lacked the thick grip surface of the Bakelite collar. Its threads were finer, more delicate. Its diameter was smaller, giving soldiers less leverage when tightening it. And its soft metal walls bent under pressure, deforming when too much torque was applied. It worked in testing. It failed in combat. The result was predictable, yet tragic in hindsight. While the German collar could be trusted in snow, sand, mud, or ice, the American nut often loosened, jammed, stripped, or simply refused to stay locked. American soldiers needed a tool that could withstand the chaos of war. What they received was a tool that worked perfectly under calm conditions, but faltered under battlefield stress. The consequences were immediate. Soldiers attempting to break tough soil in the 90-degree pick position found the blade collapsing unexpectedly. Others discovered that desert sand corroded the threads until the nut seized entirely. Some units refused to use the angled position at all out of distrust, treating the tool only as a straightforward spade. And many, given the chance, swapped their M1943 for captured German tools whenever possible. It was a lesson carved not from textbooks or engineering diagrams, but from sweat, fear, and necessity. American troops now carried a tool that looked almost identical to the German one, yet could never match it in reliability. And every failure carried a cost measured in wasted seconds and shallow foxholes under incoming fire. War teaches its lessons harshly. And the American experience in North Africa delivered one unmistakable truth. In combat, the smallest piece of equipment can reveal the biggest flaws.